All right, verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I don't know. Am I my Verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" He said, and this is God, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it'll no longer yield its strength for you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a vagrant and wanderer on the earth. And whoever finds me will kill me." So the Lord said to him, "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, so that no one finding him would slay him. Verse 13. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is too great to bear." And part of that punishment is that I will be hidden. And from your face I will be hidden. And this is one of these things that we look at when we understand what happens after we die. There are those that are going to go into that outer darkness. There's those that are going to be forever out of the presence of God. And this is a concept that a lot of people don't get about good and evil. And good and evil are a lot like light and dark, hot and cold. That dark doesn't exist, cold doesn't exist, and evil doesn't really exist. Dark is the absence of light. If it's too bright in here, I don't say, "Hey, go turn on the dark, bring it down." I tell them, turn down the light, not turn up the dark, because we don't add dark to things. We take away light, and when light leaves, the room gets darker. Same thing with heat and cold. All right, we don't add cold to things. What we do is we take heat out of things, and as we remove heat, there's less heat, it feels cold. And it's the same thing with good or evil, that evil in and of itself isn't a thing. Evil is the absence of God's presence. And so when sin came into the world, there was that separation between God and the world. There was that sin that separates us. And when God's presence isn't there, that's when evil is. And that's why when you see people without God's presence in their heart, this carnal evil nature takes over. And that's where that evil comes from. And evil in the world, this selfishness is what drives it. It says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's what drives people, is that selfishness that I want greed, I covet, and I'm going to take for me. And all these things work contrary to God. And they're because the presence of God isn't there to give them the fruit of the Spirit, that love, that generosity, that self-sacrificing love that we call agape. We'll get into that in a little bit. And when those things are missing, then we no longer have the presence of God there. And so then evil exists, and then evil flourishes. There's a famous quote that says that in order for that all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. And this is what it is. We have to take good and we have to interject it into the evil world. We have to take the light of God that's within us and we have to bring that out into the world by being that example, not by telling people. People don't want to hear it. People have heard it all their lives. They don't want to hear it anymore. They want to see it. You know, it says in the book of James, "You show me your faith without your works, I'll show you my faith by my works." And this is what people are looking for. They're looking, they want to see. What are you doing? Not what you're talking about. We've heard it all before. Is there love in what you do? Do you care for each other? Are the fruits of the Spirit there? And so this is what we have to understand. So now Cain was cast out from the presence of God. He was cast out from his family. And nothing he did would prosper now, because it says that God will give the increase. One man plants, one man tends the field, but God gives the increase, right? And so here this is that when he cultivates the ground, verse 12, it will no longer yield its strength to you. So he's no longer going to have anything. It says he's going to be a vagrant and a wanderer on earth. He's not going to have a home. He's going to be just out in the world. He's going to be forsaken for what he did. He's going to be now disfellowshipped and put out for this sin. Verse 16. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And Nod means wandering. So whether Nod was an actual place or that he went out from the garden east of Eden and wandered around there, and that's kind of how he settled. He just wandered, and this is what God said this was going to be his curse that was on him, that he would be a vagrant and a wanderer. And so it says he went out to the land where he wanders, and he stayed out there and wandered around. But there had to be other people there, and this is one of these things that the Bible's not clear on. Was the Bible the genealogy of the actual first people, the only people that he made? Well, it's hard to say, because Cain went out and he found himself a wife. Was that one of his sisters? Was it other people that were out around there? We don't know. It doesn't even say that he took to himself a wife at any point. It just goes into verse 17 that says, Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Now, there's two Enochs in the Bible. This isn't the important one. This isn't the one that wrote the book. This isn't the one that walked with God and was not, because God took him. This is Cain's son, Enoch. And he just built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. So Cain went out in this land of Nod, wandering, and I guess he finally wound up settling out there when he had a wife. He started having kids, and he named the city after his oldest son, Enoch. And verse 18, now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methusael, and Methusael became the father of Lamech. Now Lamech took to himself two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of all those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Now how that happens, I don't know, because it said that his brother Abel kept sheep and livestock, right? And so now it says this one's the father of it. But then again, don't forget, Abel was killed, so we'll see how that goes. But this is what it says. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. And this is interesting because just recently, in the past 6 months or so, maybe a year, they did a study, and they found out there really is a music gene. Some people have it, some people don't. Like in my family, if you look at it, my grandfather was a trumpet player. I was a dancer. My son's a music educator. My brother was a guitarist. My uncle was a drummer. There's just music just runs in my family. There's a lot of people that are involved in it, and those that don't play instruments are constantly listening to the radio. They don't go the day without listening to music, and it just kind of touches us deeper. And then some people, like my wife, she's like, music, don't matter. She can go days, weeks without listening to it. No music. And there's this gene that some people respond to music differently, and it's interesting to see that here it is, that we see it from Cain, was that Jubal was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe, and Jubal was Cain's great-grandson. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and irons, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And that's unusual that they name the woman, but they don't say too much about her, except that they give her a name, which was kind of nice. Very few women in the Old Testament get mentioned. There's probably were other sisters and stuff like that too that weren't mentioned. Lamech said to his wife, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. You wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. And this is this arrogance that we see here in Lamech, that he decided that, I guess maybe this is the first example of people taking the Bible and taking what happened and twisting it to suit their own needs. Instead of looking at the lesson that was objectively there in the Bible, he says, look, see, God's protecting Cain and he killed somebody. Now I killed two people. God's going to protect me even more. And that was arrogance and pride. Again, that wasn't seeking God's will. This was more of Cain's thing, where it's my will and I'm going to make my God in my image. And this is what I think my God would do, because If I was God, this is what I would do. And this is what happens here. So now Lamech thinks he's so great. And now we're back to Adam and Eve, verse 25. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And this is an interesting thing, because up until this point, God was seeking man. God was wandering in the garden. God was there. God was a presence. Then we see with Cain and Abel, they start offering sacrifices to God. That's calling down the presence of God and trying to get it. And now we see here the next generation after Cain and Abel, Adam's grandchildren, and now they needed to start to call upon the name of the Lord, and they're calling for God, and they're trying to restore this relationship that they had with him prior to the fall and the transgression. So here it is, that people are starting to call upon the name of the Lord. And following Seth is important, because all throughout the Bible, what we follow through the Old Testament is the bloodline of Christ. And when we see the genealogies and stuff, a lot of that is dealing with, so we could track back who Messiah was, because he was specifically from certain bloodlines. And this became important to understand later on. But these following this bloodline and the purity of who Jesus is becomes important. We'll see that later on with Noah and other things like that, that there's this genetic purity that God was going for among his Jewish people. There was, I forget what they call it, not really xenophobia, but they didn't allow them to take for themselves wives in the nations round about him. He wanted him to have only Jewish wives or Israeli wives or whatever you want to call them, and keep this genetic purity going along. There were things that we know today that are result of genetic anomalies, and those things, those sins were often taken, and that person was killed to remove that gene line, that germ line from Israel and from its people. So it was an important thing that happened, and it's an important thing to understand that God was concerned about the gene lines. God was concerned about genealogies, who you were, who your past was, and that all kind of follows us along. A lot more so in the Old Testament under the old Aaronic priesthood and under the law of Moses. That became a lot more important. In the New Testament, not so much, because now we're given the spirit of adoption, and we become members of Christ's body. So now we kind of get adopted into that, so our genealogy doesn't matter anymore. Being Christian isn't a birthright. Being Christian is an individual choice that we all make, which gives us the church the spirit of adoption. So now we're adopted into this. Now we have a shorter lineage, a shorter genealogy session back to Christ, to God itself. So instead of it going from me to my father to my grandfather all the way back, say through David, then all the way back, we could trace it all the way back to Adam and then to God. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. Now it goes from me to Jesus to God. Right there. We got it done. It's taken care of. Because now there's one mediator between man and God, and that's the person Christ Jesus, right? And that's in 1 John. And that is Genesis 4, and we'll stop there.